We're coming down to the wire on our window grill project and getting really close to doing the actual assembly work on it. And one of the things we're going to have to assemble are our scrolls, either on the top rail or on this center picket like we had in our drawing. And there are a few ways that you can do this. Now, we're being inspired or trying to one-up the tacky splatter welded quote-unquote wrought iron piece that I found on eBay. And of course the way that that is done is just with a couple of welds here and here. And of course that will hold this together just fine, and from a distance nobody will ever know the difference. But we'll know the difference, and the whole point of this project is to do a better job and to do it the way a blacksmith would do it, and the way blacksmiths have done it for thousands of years in ornamental work. If you look at the great ornamental work across Europe that was done long before a welder, the stuff holds up, it holds together, it's functional, and they had other ways of doing it besides arc welding. And one of those ways is with a hot collar. So you ask, what is a hot collar? Well, this isn't the latest trend in microwavable snack food. It's a blacksmithing technique, and let's take a look at a couple of things that were assembled with collars so you can see what I'm talking about. Well, here's a window grill I've done before, and we've taken a look at this a few times, but perhaps not with a lot of detail. Here, 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 and here are all hot collars, meaning the collar that holds this together is formed, its final fit is done hot around these bars, and it's been over in the back. There's no welding, no forge welding, no arc welding, no kind of welding at all, no riveting. It's the collar and the fact that the hot material shrinks to fit that makes this a tight fit. These collars up here are half collars and they're riveted, so it's not the same thing. But all of these down in here were all done hot. Down lower in the grill, these skinnier collars were also done hot, as well as the collars on the side here. That's what we're talking about when we talk about a hot collar. And collars can come in pretty much any size stock, but they should relate to what you're working on. For something like this, I think using collars of 1/8 or 3/16 thick, 1/2 inch wide is going to be very appropriate. For doing something like a big gate or big railing, you might use collars out of 1/4 inch material that's 1 inch or 1.5 inches wide, if that's what it needs. But for the most part, 1/8, 3/16, maybe 1/4 thick, and 1/2 or 3/4 wide is probably enough for most collars in most applications. Today I've got a piece of 3/16 by 1/2. I didn't actually have any of this on hand, so I went ahead and took a piece of 1/4 by 1/2, drew it out till it was 3/16 thick, and this is what we're going to make our collar out of. Now, this isn't something you just kind of do. This is one of those places where you really need to take the time, understand what you're doing, understand the math, do the math, and calculate out what you need for collar, or they don't fit right. So for those that don't like doing the math, I'm sorry, there's not an easy way around it for this part of the project. Now, the good news, though, is the formula is pretty common. This is something that people have been doing for a long time. There's no mystery here. You don't have to figure out what the math is going to be. You just have to make the quick calculations. And I'm going to refer once again to one of my favorite shop resources for this type of work, Francis Whitaker's Blacksmith Cookbook. This is what Francis did for a living. He was very good at it. He knew what the formulas were, and he's put them in writing for you. So we're going to look at this real quick. And again, if you don't have a copy of this book, this is one I highly recommend. It can be a hard read at times, but the information is invaluable if you're looking at doing ornamental type work. There's a huge amount of good information in here. And just having the formula for the hot collars might be worth the price of the book. And last time I mentioned this book, people said that it was still available as a reprint from a number of sources. So take a look, and I'll try to put a link right down here in the video that tells you where you can find one. I think Centaur Forge is one, but I'll double check that before I put the link in to make sure that's the right place. So here's what Francis has to say about hot collars, is that the collar length is measured around the pieces. So for this example, I'm not actually collaring our grill together. I'm going to use two pieces of 1/2 inch square bar. So that's 1 inch across, a 1/2 inch wide, another inch across, and another 1/2 inch wide or thick. So that's 1, 1.5, 2.5, 3 inches all the way around. So the measurement around, we know that's 3 inches for my example today, and you have to figure this out for every collar. And for the grill project, they're all going to be just a little bit different. There'll be multiple collars in different places. Plus 2.5 times the thickness of the collar material. This is one of the reasons I went with 3/8 is because he's already done the math, or 3/16, excuse me. And he says 3/16 is best for most collars, so you add 15 30-seconds, which is 2.5 times. So 3/16 would be 6 30-seconds. So 15 30-seconds added to that. So I need 3 inches plus 15 30-seconds to make my collar. And that will be a square cut. And so we're going to cut this to length that long, and then we'll go on to the next step. And I'll show all that to you. Hopefully you've had a chance to read this if you're trying to read it. If not, buy the book. And here I'll show you Francis's example of the project. This is pretty much exactly what I'm going to do. So we'll cover that as we do it. So this is a good place for a fairly accurate layout tool here. I'm going to make a mark at 0 and then 3 and 15 30-seconds. I'm going to go to the other side of the square where this is actually marked in 30 seconds. I can't read those little 64th marks. This is one of those places where it's just as easy to do this with a hacksaw as any other tool. The only way to get good at cutting a square cut with a hacksaw is to just do it. Practice, practice, practice. And that's an old dull blade, so this really doesn't take all that long. Now Francis's formula, it gets a bevel on each end, and the bevels are opposite, so one bevel runs this way, the other, well, they're running the same direction, but that means a short end here and a long end here. Hope that makes sense. That way they overlap. But this is to the sharp end of each bevel is his measurement, so we're going to file the bevel in, and he likes about twice the thickness, so we're going to take about 3/8 back. And I'm not going to measure this part too precisely because they'll still overlap regardless. But if it's too long a bevel, you'll have a thin spot. If it's too short a bevel, you'll have a fat spot. This actually ends up to be about 30 degrees, I think. Now this bevel then goes on the other side, so they're both angling in the same direction. Same 30 degrees. That's all you need to do to that. So now this piece of collar stock is ready. What I didn't mention is that you can prepare this different ways. A lot of people will chisel a groove down either side, put a little bead on it, and you can do other decorative things to a collar. We're not going to do that because that's just getting more advanced, and let's just make sure we can make a collar before we worry about the advanced collar. Now I have beveled the front side of the collar slightly so it looks a little bit better. So on the flat back side, I want to mark my center line. And it should be there. Now another way to do this, besides doing the math down to 64ths of an inch, would actually be if you have one of these center finding rules that measures from both ends and will tell you what the center line is. And just line up till both measurements are the same, and that gives you your center. And we were within about a 1/16 of an inch there. Some of that comes down to me just not being able to see the fine lines on the 64ths and 32nds on this, so it can be kind of tough. You can get safety glasses with cheaters in them if you need it. Okay, so we know where our center line is. We know that ultimately that needs to line up with the centers here. So that means we're 1/2 inch off. That's a full 1 inch. So we'll just measure a 1/2 inch from that center line and make another mark. And I'm also measuring towards the end where the long point will be on the inside of the collar so that the other side will overlap this when we're done. Now this gets really technical and difficult at this moment. You just put that in the vise right at that line, and you put a nice crisp bend in it. And yes, this part can be done cold. I'm just going to crisp that up a little bit. So that's the beginning of our collar. It's a little overbent there, so I'm going to open it up just a hair. That looks more 90. So now we need to bend the other one. And now we're not going to bother with any more measurements. We just need to bend that around the way it should be. And you can't lock this in the vise because the vise jaws aren't the right size. So what are we going to do? Now we know this is going to be wrapped around 1 inch worth of material. So you could put this in the vise and bend it, except that the tab sticks out. It is in your way. So a piece of 1 inch bar that's scrap, put in your vise. Hold that collar up good and tight to that, and lock that so it's just above the edge of the jaws, because you're going to end up driving it down a little bit, and clamp your vise good and tight. Now these blocks, if you do this all the time, Francis liked these out of case-hardened material so that they lasted longer. If you do it every now and then, a scrap that you find by the chop saw or the bandsaw works just fine for this. But 4140 out of them and harden them wouldn't be bad, but I don't do enough of these to warrant the time and trouble to make that. So now that is bent over. And I'm just going to put it back in here. Again, I'm just kind of crisping up the outer corners of this. It's not really a square upset corner, just kind of a pretty corner. And there is our collar ready to bend. The plan then is to fit this collar around these 2 1/2-inch bars and bend these tabs over hot so that as they cool they will shrink and squeeze the bars together. There's a couple of ways you can do this. I have seen people quite often that just use a torch to heat the collar up, and you heat it up just where you need to make the bend, and you bend it over. I've already got the forge hot today, so I'm going to just heat the whole collar up in the forge, and I think that'll work just fine. It's probably a little bit of trouble if you're assembling a whole grill to try and shuttle all those back and forth to the forge, but since I can do this little project at the anvil, that's going to work. On a big grill where you've got to have it all out on sawhorses or on a big layout table, putting the collar in place, getting it ready, heating it with a torch, setting it, going on to the next collar is a lot faster and a lot more efficient. But for just doing this one, we're just going to do it in the forge. And we're also illustrating that you don't have to have a torch to make hot collars. So, as we do this, one thing we want to make sure that this actually fits. So I can just drive these bars down in there and make sure it fits and make sure it looks clean here, and it does. And this is where the torch comes in handy, because now I don't have to take this back off. I've also seen people that make a little anvil, a little saddle that goes underneath these, and it sets on your anvil or on your layout table where you're working and holds this so it can't shift while you're bending them. I've never done that. And I'm just going to take a pair of vice grips and I'm going to hold it when it comes out of the fire, and that way it won't shift. The other thing you can do is just get a pair of tongs that are good and stout and of the right size that you can hold it. And this I have seen Francis do, just squeezes those with the tongs and then bends these down hot. Just a couple options. This doesn't have to be at any super intense heat, just hot enough to get the job done. And you want to work fairly quickly and fairly efficiently before it cools off. I'm going to take this bar just to drive those in and make sure they really fit. Then the side that goes against the bar first. And then the other side. That is really all there is to a hot collar. And we're going to let that cool. That's really about as difficult as this project needs to be, or this technique needs to be. A hot collar by itself certainly isn't a standalone project. Collars are limited. They are not an end-all be-all solution for anything. They're meant to hold ornamental elements together. They are not meant to be big structural elements that hold your gate to the fence post or your railing to the building or anything like that. So think about it if you're designing them in. But holding scrolls to a picket, perfect for that, because the scrolls aren't structural. They're never going to go anywhere. I could probably lock this in the vise and grab one end with a wrench, and I could twist it and I could pull it apart. It's not that strong. But I can't move it by hand. It doesn't want to move. And if I don't mess with it, it's going to be strong forever. And if you need more strength, you can do more collars. So it's a good technique. It's strong. It's permanent if you do it right. There's no need for a weld, although I have seen people that before they put the collar on will run a drill bit part way in to create a little well and then fill that up with their arc welder, grind it flush, and then the bars aren't coming apart, and the collar at that point is really just hiding the arc weld. If you do the collar right, you don't need the arc weld. Like I say, this shouldn't be the technique you use where you need that kind of strength. If you did, that might be an option you'd explore, but that's not what we're going to do in our project because we're avoiding any and all arc welding. There's a closer look at the finished collar. It holds those bars nice and tight together. There's no real air gaps. And you can see this didn't quite overlap far enough, so I either put too much of a bevel on this side, or perhaps I could have cut the whole thing just a hair longer, but it's not bad. And it's shrunk up a little bit since we put it in, so it has been shrinking because those were a little bit tighter initially. But these are all, that part is on the back side, and it's better to have that little tiny gap right here than it is for these to overlap and have a big lump. So I think that's a perfectly acceptable collar. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that's practical. I think the next thing we're going to do on our grill is start putting the pieces together, because there's not any other technique that we need to know before we can get to that point. So if you're doing something like this and you're working along with me, practice a few hot collars so you understand it, do the math, see if you get it right, make some test ones. For our grill, we need at least 3 different lengths of collars depending on where we're putting them. I think we're going to need 1 of one size, 2 of another, and 2 of another, so 5 collars total I think is all the grill has. I'd have to count. And it is typical to cut, bevel, bend all your collars first, and have them ready to go when assembly time comes. So we'll actually look at the collar again when we do that. We won't go into as much detail, but we will cover a little bit of it again as we assemble the window grill, so there will be a little bit of a refresher on the hot collar and a lot of the other topics that we've covered. I hope you found that useful. I hope it was enjoyable. Do watch some of the other videos. Share the videos with your friends, but make time in your day to get out to the shop. So get out there, make something, stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.